Turkey was already on the table when my cousin said it. Not my uncle, not my aunt, my cousin Becca, 22 years old, still in college, still using my aunt's credit card for everything, leaned across the mashed potatoes and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Oh my God, your sister just closed on that house in Naperville. Did you see the pictures? It's stunning." I said I had seen them. 3 bedrooms, my aunt added, nodding like she was announcing something sacred. Good school district too. She really has it together. My dad looked at me from across the table. Not with cruelty, that was never his style. He looked at me with something softer and, somehow worse, pity maybe. Or just the tired version of a question he'd been asking me since I was 24. When is it going to happen for you? He didn't say it out loud that night. He just picked up his fork. But I heard it anyway. I should tell you something about my sister first, because none of this makes sense without her. Her name is Lena, and she is genuinely wonderful. I want to be clear about that. She works hard, she's kind, she calls our mom every Sunday without being asked. I'm not telling this story because I hate her. I'm telling it because for most of my adult life, I have been the comma in her sentence. And then there's her other daughter. Lena graduated college in 4 years straight into a marketing job at a firm downtown. By 26, she had a 401k and a boyfriend who wore button-downs. By 28, she had a ring. By 30, the house. And me? I took a different road. Not a worse one. I understand that now, but a different one. And for a long time, I couldn't see the difference. I spent 2 years after college figuring out that I didn't want the job I'd studied for. I had a degree in business administration and a deep, quiet dread every time I pictured myself in a cubicle for 40 years. So I left the first real job I got, after 8 months, and spent the next year doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses while I figured out what I actually wanted. My family did not take this well. Not loudly. That's the thing about my family. They're not screaming at the dinner table people. They're sighing very audibly people. They're asking follow-up questions in a certain tone people. My dad would say things like, "So the freelance thing is still going?" with just enough weight on the word still to make it land. My aunt would say, "Oh, that's interesting," whenever I explained what I was doing, in the voice people use when they mean the opposite. My mom was gentler, but even she had a habit of prefacing things with, "I just worry about you," that made me feel like a problem to be solved. The worst part was the holidays. Thanksgiving especially. My family has this tradition of gathering at my aunt and uncle's house in suburban Illinois. My parents, my aunt and uncle, their 2 kids, and whoever else is around. It's warm and loud and smells like my aunt's green bean casserole, and for years I dreaded it more than any other day of the year. Not because anything terrible happened, just because of the questions. How's the job search going? There wasn't a job search. There was a deliberate choice, but that distinction never landed. Are you still doing the bookkeeping thing? Yes. Still. Always said like still was an indictment. Lena just got a promotion. Did she tell you? She had. She texted me first, actually, and I was proud of her. But somehow this version of the news, delivered at the table, was aimed at me like a dart. I started making excuses to leave early. I started volunteering to do dishes so I could stand in the kitchen alone for 20 minutes. I started sitting at the far end of the table, near my grandfather, who was 81 and hard of hearing and never asked me anything about my career. I loved that man. The year I turned 28, something shifted. It started small. I had picked up a client, a woman named Dr. Okafor, who ran a dental practice in the suburbs, and she had referred me to 3 other medical practices in her network. Suddenly, I wasn't doing bookkeeping out of desperation. I was doing it because I was genuinely good at it, and people kept finding me because of it. I got my CPA license that year, studied for 8 months on weekends, took the exam in February, and passed all 4 sections on the first attempt. I didn't tell my family. I know that sounds strange, but I'd spent so many years watching my accomplishments disappear into the noise of Lena's louder milestones that something in me just stopped wanting to compete for airtime. I kept it quiet. I let it be mine for a while. I also, around that same time, started seeing a financial advisor. something I'd been meaning to do for years but kept putting off because I told myself I didn't earn enough to need one yet. Turned out I was wrong about that. Between my client income and some aggressive saving, I had more in my accounts than I'd realized. Not life-changing money, but real money. Purposeful money. I started looking at properties the following spring. I want to be honest, this wasn't some grand plan to outdo anyone. I wasn't thinking about Lena's house in Naperville or my dad's sighing questions or any of that. I was thinking about the fact that I was 30 years old and tired of renting a one-bedroom apartment from a landlord who took 3 weeks to fix the heat every winter. I was thinking about stability. About having something that was mine. I found a townhouse in a neighborhood about 40 minutes from my parents. 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, a kitchen with actual counter space. The first time I walked through it, I stood in the living room for a long moment and thought, I could live here. I could actually be happy here. I made an offer the following week. It was accepted. I closed on a Thursday in October, signed the papers alone at a title company conference table, shook hands with the agent, and drove home to my new home, stopping at a grocery store on the way to buy pasta and a bottle of wine. Because it was a Thursday, and I had to work the next morning, and that's just what the moment actually looked like. There was no party, no announcement, no post on social media. I called my mom that night and told her. She was happy, genuinely, warmly happy, and said she wanted to come see it as soon as I was settled. She didn't say anything about Lena's house. She just said, "I'm so proud of you, honey." I held on to that for a long time, but I didn't tell my dad yet. I didn't tell my aunt or my uncle or my cousin Becca. I just let it be quiet, the way I'd learned to let things be quiet, and I waited. Thanksgiving came 6 weeks later. I almost didn't go. I'd been to every family Thanksgiving since I was born, and somewhere in the past few years, they'd started to cost me something. Not the day itself, the recovery after. The way I drive home replaying conversations, cataloging the questions, feeling the specific exhaustion of being around people who love you but don't quite see you. But my mom had called twice to ask if I was coming, and the second time, her voice had that texture in it that made me feel guilty for even considering skipping it. So I went. I brought a pie, apple, from a bakery near my new house. There's a family-owned place 2 streets over that makes the best pie I've ever had in my life, and I'd already started treating it like my own personal discovery, the kind of small neighborhood thing that makes you feel anchored somewhere. My aunt's house was the same as always. The good chaos of too many coats on the hooks by the door, the football game on in the den, the smell of everything cooking at once. My grandfather was in his usual chair. My uncle was doing the thing he does where he stands in the kitchen doorway, not actually helping but commenting on the cooking. I hugged everyone. I set the pie down. I poured myself a glass of wine and found a spot near the window and felt, for a few minutes, actually okay. Then we sat down to eat. It went fine for a while. The usual rhythms, passing dishes, catching up about small things. My uncle telling a story about something that happened at his golf club that nobody was fully listening to. I was talking to my grandfather about a book he'd been reading. I was almost relaxed. Then Becca said it, about Lena's house, about how stunning it was. And my aunt leaned in with the school district detail, and my dad picked up his fork, and I felt it again, that familiar shrinking. The reflex to make myself smaller, to take up less air in the room, to not say anything that would invite more questions or more comparisons or more of those long looks that meant we don't know what to do with you. I let the conversation move on. Someone asked about Lena's renovation plans. Someone else mentioned that real estate in Naperville had really held its value. I reached for my water glass. And then my uncle, my dad's brother, the one who was never in 20 years, asked me a single question about my actual life, only about the outline of it, looked down the table at me and said, "So what about you? You still renting that apartment?" The table didn't go quiet. People were still passing the cranberry sauce, but I felt the weight of the question settle over me like something dropped from a height. I looked at him, and I thought about 6 weeks ago, standing in an empty living room with afternoon light coming through the front windows, thinking I could be happy here. And I thought about 8 months of studying for an exam nobody knew I was taking. About the client who'd referred me to 3 others. About a Thursday afternoon at a title company conference table, signing my name on something real. And something in me just released. Not anger, not triumph, exactly. Just a very quiet, very settled sense of being done with performing smallness for people who hadn't bothered to look. I set my water glass down. No, I said. I bought a place, actually. Closed in October. My uncle blinked. Oh. My dad looked up. A townhouse, I said. About 40 minutes from here. Nice neighborhood. Little backyard. I've been there 6 weeks. The cranberry sauce stopped moving around the table. My aunt said, "Oh, why didn't you say anything?" And I looked at her. And I thought about every Thanksgiving and every Easter and every birthday dinner where Lena's news had filled the room and mine had been received with polite confusion or redirected into another question about when I was going to get serious about things. And I said, simply, I didn't need the moment to mean anything to anyone but me. The table was quiet for exactly long enough to matter. Then my grandfather, from his chair at the end, said, "Good girl." And my mom reached over and put her hand on mine. My uncle cleared his throat and put her hand on mine. My uncle cleared his throat and reached for his fork. My aunt said something about wanting to see photos. My cousin Becca looked at her phone. The conversation moved on, the way it always does, like water rerouting around a stone. But something was different. I could feel it, not in the room exactly, but in me. The specific relief of having said a true thing to people who had underestimated you for years, without needing them to apologize for it, without needing them to understand the full weight of it. Just saying it, plainly, and watching it land. I ate my dinner. I talked to my grandfather about his book. I helped clear the table. I cut the pie and put it out on the counter, and watched my family eat it without knowing where it was from. From the bakery 2 streets from the home I'd bought and didn't tell anyone about for 6 weeks because it was mine, and for once I wanted it to be mine first. I left around 8. My mom walked me to the door and hugged me for longer than usual. "I'm really proud of you," she said. "I hope you know that." "I do," I said. And I meant it. I drove home on the highway, the radio on low, the October darkness moving past the windows. When I pulled into my parking space and sat for a moment before going inside, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I'd won anything, because it was never a competition, not one I'd signed up for anyway. I just felt like myself, fully, quietly, completely myself. The thing about being the one in your family who takes the long way, the winding, non-linear, confusing to other people way, is that nobody tracks your progress because it doesn't look like progress from the outside. It looks like wandering. It looks like still figuring it out. It looks like a girl with a business degree doing bookkeeping for dentists and not being able to answer, "So what are you doing these days?" with anything that registers as success in the conventional vocabulary. But here's what was actually happening. Underneath all that apparent wandering, I was learning what I was actually good at. I was building something slowly and carefully, without the pressure of anyone watching. I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what would look right at a Thanksgiving table. And by the time I was ready, by the time I signed my name on that deed and shook that agent's hand, I had done it entirely on my own terms. No one helped me with the down payment. No one co-signed anything. No one knew I was even looking, because by that point I'd gotten very comfortable being invisible. And I'd learned that invisibility has a useful side effect. Nobody's watching, which means nobody's in the way. I think about my cousin Becca sometimes, who is 22 and has her whole life in front of her, and I don't resent the things she said about Lena's house. She's young. She repeats what the adults in our family repeat, because that's what you do when you're 22 and still forming your own opinions. She'll figure it out. I think about my uncle, who still, 3 months later, has not said one word to me about my townhouse. Not a question, not a congratulations, not even a, "So how's the place?" at Christmas. And I find I don't mind that either. Not really. His silence tells me something about the limits of his curiosity, not the limits of my worth. I think about my dad, who called me the week after Thanksgiving and was quiet for a moment before he said, "I didn't know you were looking." And I said, "I know." I wasn't ready to talk about it yet. And he said, "Fair enough." And then he asked if I needed help moving furniture. which was the most practical and tender thing he could have offered, and I said yes. And we spent a Saturday afternoon rearranging my living room while he told stories about the first apartment he and my mom had, and it was one of the best days I can remember. That's the thing about family. They can hold you in the wrong-sized version of yourself for years, and then one afternoon they'll show up and just be your dad, helping you move a couch. I'm not angry. I was, for a while, not at anyone specifically, just at the long accumulation of being the comma, the afterthought, the one who was still figuring it out, while Lena's timeline marched forward in bright, visible steps. That anger was real and it deserved to exist, but I'm on the other side of it now. I'm sitting in my living room in the townhouse I bought with my own money, the backyard just visible through the glass door, and it's mine in a way that nothing has ever been mine before. Not mine because I proved something to someone, mine because I built it quietly, in the years when nobody was looking, on the long road that nobody understood, towards something that didn't need to make sense to anyone else. I didn't catch up to Lena. I went somewhere else entirely, and it took me longer than I expected to realize that somewhere else was exactly where I was supposed to be. I used to think that the people who loved you were automatically the ones who saw you clearly. It took me a long time, too long, honestly, to understand that love and perception are two completely separate things. My family loved me. They just had a fixed image of who I was, and they kept looking at that image instead of looking at me. And for years, I let them. That's the part I have to own. Every time I went quiet at the table, every time I shrank back from a question instead of answering it honestly, every time I decided it wasn't worth explaining, I was making a choice too. I was choosing to stay invisible because it felt safer than being seen and misunderstood again. That's not their fault. That's just what happens when you stop trying to be known by people who aren't ready to know you. What changed wasn't them. It was me deciding, very quietly and without any announcement, that I was done building my life around their expectations of it. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a cutting everyone off way. Just in the ordinary, daily way of making decisions based on what I actually wanted. The CPA license I studied for on weekends. The clients I built one referral at a time. The townhouse I bought and didn't tell a single person about for 6 weeks because it was mine first. That's the thing about integrity that nobody really talks about. Most of it happens when no one is watching. It's the choice you make at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night when you're exhausted and you could skip the studying and no one would know. It's the client you do right by, even when a shortcut would be invisible. It's the slow, unglamorous accumulation of doing what you said you were going to do, for no audience, with no applause. That's what I was doing in those years when my family thought I was wandering. I was just building in a direction they couldn't see yet. And the moment at that Thanksgiving table, when my uncle asked if I was still renting and I told him, simply, that I'd bought a place in October and just hadn't needed anyone to know yet. That moment wasn't about winning. It wasn't revenge. It was just the natural consequence of everything I had done quietly finally becoming visible. Cause and effect. You build something real, and eventually, reality shows up at the dinner table. What I want to carry forward from all of it, from the years of being the comma, the afterthought, the one who was still figuring it out, is this. The path that looks like wandering from the outside is sometimes the most direct route to exactly where you need to be. You don't owe anyone a progress report on a journey they never believed in. Your only job is to keep going, to keep choosing integrity over performance, and to trust that the things you build in private will eventually speak for themselves. Lena's house is beautiful. I've seen the pictures. And my townhouse, with its little backyard and the bakery 2 streets over and the afternoon light through the front windows, is exactly what I needed. We went different directions. Both roads were real. I'm done shrinking to fit a version of myself that was never accurate to begin with.